When foreigners think of China, they often picture Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, or maybe the Great Wall. But if you want to understand where China truly began, you have to look at a province that many people outside China barely know. Henan. The name literally means south of the river, the Yellow River. This land sits in the center of China's Great Plains. It's not only a province on the map, it's one of the deepest memory banks of Chinese civilization. Here, ancient dynasties rose, capitals were built, philosophers walked, monks trained, farmers fed empires, armies marched through, rivers flooded, famines came, millions suffered, and still, the people endured. Henan has witnessed China at its most glorious and at its most painful. It is the birthplace of legends, the heartland of early Chinese states, and one of the most important stages on which the drama of Chinese history unfolded. So today, we're not just visiting a province, we are entering the center of the Middle Kingdom. Look at a relief map of China, and the country explains itself. In the west, the Tibetan Plateau, 4 kilometers above the sea. Then the land steps down to the lowest plateau, a vast tableland of yellow, wind-blowing silt. Then it steps down again, and simply opens, the North China Plain, flat to the horizon. Henan sits exactly on the final step, where the highlands end and the Great Plain begins. This is not a small detail. That is the whole story. Because the Yellow River comes tearing off the lowest plateau, carrying the heaviest settlement load of any major river on earth. The moment it reaches Henan, the land flattens, the current slows, and the river drops its cargo of silt. That silt is why Chinese civilization started here. It is the most fertile and the most easily worked soil in East Asia. Loose enough to farm with a wooden stick, thousands of years before anyone had an iron plow. There are mountains, the Taihang Wall in the north, the Funiu and the Qinling to the west and south, the range that separates wheat-eating northern China from rice-eating southern China. And at the center, Songshan. There's water, the Yellow River across the middle, the Huai in the south, and later a canal cut straight through this province to bind north to south. And there are people. Mountains for defense, rivers for movement, silt for grain. Whoever held this ground could feed an army and then move it. The Chinese named this place Zhongyuan, the Central Plain, and the Tianxia Zhizhong, the center of all under heaven. They were not being poetic. They were reading a map. Henan was the center of China, long before China had an emperor. In 1921, a Swedish geologist, Johan Gunnar Andersen, dug in a village in western Henan called Yangshao and founded Chinese archaeology. What came out of the ground was painted pottery, red clay carrying black spirals and fish, made by farmers between 5000 and 3000 BC. They named the whole culture after the village, Yangshao. And these villagers were not wanderers. They grew millet, kept pigs, and buried their dead with care. This is also the landscape Chinese tradition assigns to the Yellow Emperor. Then the village became a state. At Erlitou, near Luoyang, archaeologists found palace foundations, planned roads, and the earliest bronze vessel workshops in East Asia. It is a city built around 1750 BC, widely considered China's first state-level society, and identified by many Chinese scholars with the Xia dynasty. Around 1600 BC, the Xia dynasty fell to the Shang dynasty, The Shang moved their capital repeatedly, and every time within Henan. Firstly Zhengzhou, then Yanshi, finally Anyang. It was at Anyang in 1899 oracle bones were found. These bones became famous over decades as it opened a window into Shang dynasty's writing and ritual life at its earliest known stage. The latest research indicates the markings were anything but random marks. They were part of a well-ordered system in the Shang royal court, used to record state decisions and daily affairs. In 1046 BC, the Shang fell to the Zhou, who came out of the west, from what is now Shanxi. And then the Zhou did something revealing. Having conquered from the west, they built their second capital in the east, at Luoyang. The Duke of Zhou explained why. This was the center of all under heaven, equidistance for tribute from every direction. A bronze wine vessel survives from that moment, the Hezhun. Its inscription records the Duke of Zhou's plan and his reason to move the capital to Luoyang in 122 characters. Among them, 2 words stand together for the first time in written record. 中国. It did not yet mean China, the nation. It means the central domain, the place in the middle, where Henan is located. A civilization that only ever talks to itself dies. Henan's second great act was absorbing something foreign and make it Chinese. In 68 AD, tradition says 2 Indian monks arrived at the Han capital of Luoyang with a white horse carrying Buddhist scriptures. The emperor built them a monastery, the White Horse Temple, remembered as the first Buddhist temple in China. At the Longmen grottos, beginning around 493 AD, and continued for 400 years, emperors, monks, and ordinary families caught more than 2,000 caves into the limestone cliff above the Yi River, filling them with over 100,000 Buddhist images. The greatest is the Vairocana Buddha at the Fengxian Temple, 17 meters tall, completed in 675, founded in part by the woman who became Emperor Wu Zetian, the only woman ever to rule China in her own name. Tradition says the face is hers. The earliest figures on those cliffs look like Indians and Central Asians, but later in the Tang Dynasty, the figures start to look like Chinese, full-faced, serene, imperial. A foreign religion become a Chinese one, carved into a rock wall. East of Longmen rises Songshan Mountain, the central peak of China's 5 sacred mountains, the center of the center. On slope, in 495 AD, a Northern Wei emperor built a monastery for an Indian monk. The temple's name was Shaolin. A generation later, another Indian monk arrived, Bodhidharma. He sat facing a cave wall for 9 years and taught Buddhism through direct experience rather than through scriptures. That became Chan, which the world later met under the Japanese name Zen. And out of the same valley came the martial tradition that made the word Shaolin famous on every continent. UNESCO lists the whole area under the name that the Chinese always used for it, the center of heaven and earth. For most of the first 2,000 years of Imperial China, power came to Henan. Luoyang served as capital for 13 dynasties. Kaifeng for 8, Anyang and Shangqiu held the royal courts too. Why here? Over and over. Grain and water. In 605 AD, the 3 emperor Yang conscripted an enormous labor force to dig a 1,000 kilometers canal from the Yellow River at Luoyang towards Yangtze. It is called the Tongji Canal which became the spine of the Grand Canal, the longest artificial waterway ever built. His dynasty only lasted 37 years, but the canal reshaped China. For the first time, the rise from the west-south could feed armies from the dry north directly. Tang's Luoyang was a world city, but Henan's peak came later and further east. Kaifeng, the northern zone's capital, then called Dongjing, from roughly 1013 to 1127. It was by most estimates the largest city on earth. Perhaps 600,000 to 1 million people lived there inside the 3 rings of walls. And it was not merely big. There were night markets which required the abolition of ancient curfew, a wide variety of printed books, government-issued paper money, the first in the world, and the coal-fired iron on a scale Britain would not match until the Industrial Revolution. We know all those in extraordinary detail because of one painting. Along the river during the Qingming Festival, painted by Zhang Zheduan in the early 12th century. Incan silk, 25 centimeters tall and 5.5 meters long. You don't view it all at once. You unroll it like a tracking shot. And what it shows is not an emperor, not a battle, not a god. It shows ordinary people, boatmen hauling on ropes, a camel train at the gate, shopkeepers, fortune tellers, drinkers, children, a misbehaving donkey, hundreds of figures doing unremarkable things on an ordinary day. That is what a civilization at its peak chooses to memorialize. Not its power, its daily life, secure enough to be worth painting. Hold that image because of what happens next. In 1127, the Jurchen armies of the Jin dynasty took Kaifeng. They sacked the city, emptied the treasure, and carried both emperors and thousands of the court north into captivity, where they died. The Chinese remember it as Jin Kang Zhichi, the humiliation of Jin Kang. 900 years later, the frieze still stands. What followed redrew China permanently. The court fled south to Hangzhou, and with it went a migration the Chinese call Yiguan Nandu. The caps and gowns crossed south. Scholar officials, artisans, merchants, and their libraries, out of the central plain into the Yangtze Valley and beyond. That is the moment the center of gravity of Chinese civilization leaves Henan for the south, where it has stayed ever since, and why many Cantonese and Hakka families still trace their ancestries to the central plain. Henan stopped being the seat of the throne and it became a frontier of war. Then the disasters came. In late September 1887, the Yellow River broke its dikes near Zhenzhou. The problem was structural. Centuries of silt had lifted the riverbed above the surrounding plain. These dikes were not holding a river inside the valley. They were holding a river up in the sky. When they filled, water covered an area the size of England. Estimates of the dead run from 900,000 to 2 million. That was nature. June 1938 was not, with Japanese army advancing along the rail lines. Jiang Jieshi's nationalist forces deliberately breached the Yellow River dikes at the Huayuankou, north of Zhenzhou, to starve the Japanese army with water. It delayed them by months, but flooded 54,000 square kilometers. Estimates of the dead run from 500,000 to 900,000. Nearly 4 million were displaced. Then, 1942, drought, locusts, and the war economy, and the government is still collecting grain taxes from farmers who were already starving. Estimates of the toll are contested, from several hundred thousand to 3 million. Millions more fled west along the railway. The outside world learned of it because of Time correspondent Theodore White rode into Henan, saw what was on the roads, and published it. Born, Shone, broken. So how do we govern land like this? You start with the river. Chinese water authorities report no major dike bridge on the lower Yellow River since 1949, set against the previous 3,000 years, a remarkable claim. And since 2002, engineers have run an annual operation at the Xiaolangdi Dam in western Henan, a controlled surge that scours the riverbed and flushes accumulated silt out to sea, an artificial flood, staged every year to prevent a real one. But that was not enough to handle the ongoing climate change. In July 2021, Zhengzhou recorded 200 millimeters of rain in a single hour, the highest ever measured in China, and close to a year's rainfall in 3 days. 398 people died across the province, 14 in a flooded subway tunnel. A later state investigation found officials had concealed part of the toll. How is the province today? Close to 100 million people live here. Around a quarter of all the wheat China grows comes out of this soil. The Foxconn complex outside the Zhengzhou assembles roughly half of the world's iPhone. 6,000 years after Yangshao, Henan is doing what it has always done, feeding the country and making the things it sells to the world. There's a story from this land, first written down more than 2,000 years ago. An old man, Yu Gong, the foolish old man, lived with two enormous mountains blocking his door, the Taihang and the Wangwu. Both are real. Both stand on Henan's borders. One day, he announced he was going to move them, with baskets and a hoe. His neighbor laughed. "You're almost 90, he said. "How are you going to move a mountain?" The old man answered, "When I die, my sons will continue. When they die, their sons, generation after generation, without an end. But the mountains will not grow any higher. So why can't we move the mountains?" That story is usually read as a fable about perseverance. Standing in Henan, it reads more like autobiography. This is a place that has been the center of the world and a disaster zone inside a single lifetime. Flooded, starved, invaded, abandoned by its own capital. And it kept planting the same fields. The Yellow River still runs above the plain. The wheat still comes in every June. Henan is not simply where China began. It is where you see what China is made of. Not the golden age, because everyone has one, but what the people do after it ends. The mountains do not grow any higher, and so the digging continues. That was Henan. Thank you for watching. And if you have walked these places yourself, tell me what I missed in the comments.